Luca, I'll start with a question for you. Perhaps you can just tell me how you came to the project. I know originally the director James Ivory, who wrote the screenplay for the film, was maybe going to be directing it, and then you sort of took over. Can you just talk a little bit about how that came to be?
Well, it's a bit longer than that because everything started with the book 2007 by Andre Aciman, great novel, and by the producer Peter Spears and Howard Roseman, who optioned the book and then commissioned a script to a director, writer who they wanted to make the movie with. And at that stage, it was 2008, they had asked me to, because they knew me, to help them understanding how to produce that film in Italy, because the book is set in Italy. And so I got involved, and I started from being a consultant, and in time I became a producer. That version of the movie fell apart, and we tried to use the same script with different incarnations of directors. I would say almost 10. But every year it was not coming to fruition until in 2013, 14 actually. Peter and I, we went to talk to Jim because we all knew Jim well, and we said to him, "Why don't you make it into your new movie and we produce it?" Because we're big fans and we wanted to support him, particularly in a place in which he was not anymore with Ismail Merchant because he had passed away a few years before. So James and I started writing the script together. This took us a year. We got a great script, something that people reacted positively about. And we put together a budget and a schedule, and we tried to make it to finance this version of the film with Jim directing it, but it was so difficult. And we tried and tried and tried, and we never succeeded in collecting the necessary funds. But few people started to say, "Why don't you do it? Why don't you do it on a smaller budget?" And so Peter asked me, James blessed this choice, and I went on to making this into my movie.
I know all of your films are so sensual in a way, and that they're very much of the senses. It's like you can taste the food, and you can touch the fabric, and you can feel the heat, and it's something that's really special and specific about your movies. Can you describe a little bit what it is that you like about that in movies, and what it is that you do to sort of bring those feelings out?
Well, I learned through films that I love that, and it's a visceral experience to go to the movies. That it's specific the language, and that you can be provocative, and you can have an experience that is immersive and that can provoke you, but also can affect you. So I think it's about my interest in the language of cinema as a way to uh, touch me in the first place, and hopefully an audience.
And for the actors, the movie feels so rooted in the place where it is, in the location in Crema. And Michael, maybe to put that as a question, your character is so kind of observant through so much of the movie, and for you as an actor, was at times this more or less just a holiday to northern Italy? I mean, it seems like it would have been a wonderful shoot to have been a part of.
What can I say to that? It was exquisitely beautiful. It was really quiet. It was a character in the film, you know, and that acted upon us. And that house was extraordinary. I know Luca was in love with it, and we all fell in love with it. And the rural landscape that we were, you know, making our time there. It's easy to see why the Perlmans wanted to live there.
And Armie, what was it like for you to actually just kind of be in that place?
I mean, I really took the movie just to go eat pasta, so it all kind of worked.
And Timothy, you've talked about how this was a really immersive experience for you. And can you talk a little bit about that, and maybe how that impacted your performance?
Yeah, well, as Michael said, the awkward throat clear, that the town is very much a character in the film and in the book as well. So I was doing a play in New York, and Luca really encouraged me the day I finished that play to get out to Crema, which would have been about a month and a half early. And it served me tenfold because there was a certain tonal ingratiation in getting to just sit in the town and make friends in the town and get espressos and find my favorite, coffee shops and restaurants. So when it came time to shoot, I felt one with the landscape as opposed to, if I had stepped off the plane from New York a day after, finishing that play, it would have been manic and the movie would be half as long because I'd be rushing through everything.
And Luca, can you talk a little bit about that? The fact that it's not exactly rehearsal, but it's getting the actors used to the place to get them kind of feeling it. Like, what is it that made you kind of know that that's something you wanted them to do to prepare for the movie?
Well, I think it's a strategic part of my work lies in the fact that you have to get to know the people you work with in a way that you can have access to trust and the capacity of investigate them and push them. That's on one hand. On the other hand, there is the pleasure of being with them, and I think it's simply intuitive. I think that one thing is to like to make a movie, to act is something I admire very much because I would never be able to do that. It's a very complicated job, their job. So they need to have a lot of environment to grow into the characters. So the more you give them that space, the more they accept to get their time available for the filmmaking, the better it is.
And can you just tell me about casting the movie? How did you come to have Timothée and Armie in the film? And did you know that they were going to have that kind of on-screen chemistry that they do?
Well, I met Timmy a few years before doing the movie when I was producing the film, and I was very immediately drawn by him. And in fact, I spoke to the producer, and I was convinced as a director to hire him when I became the director of the film. And Armie, I've been wanting to work with him since I saw him in the Social Network. We met a few years afterwards here in LA. And then once I got the possibility to offer him a role, I did, in which was the case. And about the chemistry, I mean, maybe I'm a bit of a kamikaze, but if I have a good relationship with the individuals, I understand that they can have a good relationship between one another.
And Armie, Timothée, can you talk a little bit about whatever you did before shooting to sort of rehearse, prepare, to kind of have these moments come up on screen?
It's really interesting. I got out there about 3 weeks before we were supposed to start shooting. I think Timmy got out there about a month and a half before we were supposed to start. So we were really afforded the luxury of time. I got out there and I met him, and that afternoon, after meeting him, we were riding bikes around the town, and he was going, "That's the coffee shop you want to go to, and they make really good gelato there, and that place has really good pasta, and great pizza over there." So our relationship kind of unfurled itself really analogously to the film. So we were just afforded all this time to spend with each other.
And then everything else in the movie played out too in real life.
Yeah. We really went for it. But it was just like a wonderful experience of just, it wasn't like we were doing, I mean, we had wardrobe fittings, we had, all the stuff that you'd have to do kind of to get everything done. But we really just had the luxury of time, and we would spend hours and hours together, whether it be with Luca or doing our wardrobe test, going to see the locations, or sitting at night at his place or my place and talking about documentaries, talking about movies, talking about whatever, working on the scenes together, breaking stuff down, talking about it. So our relationship developed really naturally in a great sort of progression, and it just really helped find that comfortability with each other.
And Michael, I've heard both Timothée and Luca say that they feel like they didn't actually meet you until sometime after the shoot. And I'm curious, is that feels like part of your process and the typical way you like to work?
Interesting. I hadn't heard that. I don't know. I mean, you're given certain things to kind of absorb. In this case, my character a Latin and Greek scholar who dabbles in archaeology and art history and speaks Italian. So there was a lot for me to absorb. So I certainly had a lot to occupy myself with. But I don't know. I honestly feel like Luca said something to us at the very beginning of the process, which was he wanted us to tell this story with love and lightness, as if it was one of the most ideal summers that we're lucky if we're, you know, if we're lucky we have when we're young, where we fall in love or so we discover something for the first time. And I was surprised and delighted by that, because a lot of my dialogue was somewhat professorial or you know, weighty. So it gave me kind of freedom to have a sillier and a lighter side to some of the more weighty scenes, which I loved. And so I guess there were elements of me that they met. At least I think of myself in that way. So yeah, I mean, we all got on really quickly, and I loved hearing about what they were going through, and it was a joy, you know.
Luca, can you talk a little bit about casting Michael and working with him in the film?
Well, I find the casting of this movie was particularly easy. Everyone came on board after I asked them to if they wanted to. I'm a big fan of all of them, literally.
I know I'm so interested in kind of the perspective of the storytelling in the movie, in that it's somewhat taken from the novel, in that it has sort of this wisdom as if you're kind of looking back, you know, onto your youth, but then it also, I think, has this immediacy and vibrancy as if it's like happening in the moment. And was that something that was difficult for you to capture, to kind of have the movie kind of have that dual focus in a way?
I think the first thing you're saying is about, in a way, the aging element of melancholy that happens to be a sort of universal feeling you feel when you are in love. It's not about, in a way, retrospectively seeing the story, because that's not what the way we made the movie. We are present. We are in the movie. We are in the story. It's just that we are following the butterflies in the stomach of all these people, and then on the same time we are in the middle of them. So maybe that's it. I don't know.
And Armie, I've heard you say that you feel like Luca kind of pulled something out of you in this performance that you don't feel like you've done before on screen. And I'm curious to know what that is, like what it is that you think you did here that you maybe hadn't done before.
It's less about that and more about the fact that I've never worked with such an astute director who can just watch you and immediately know if you're bullshitting him, you know. And the thing about this movie is there's nothing to distract you. There's no green screen, there's no creature effects, there's no explosions, there's nothing that propels this story other than the emotional beats that happen between all of these characters. And that's kind of a daunting undertaking as an actor, that if these moments are the only thing that matter and you can't do it, or you're not able to make yourself vulnerable enough to feel these things or experience these things in a real visceral way, then it's not going to translate to film. So more than anything, he gave us a really safe place to go to, that vulnerable place, and be emotionally honest with yourself and with the other person in front of a camera that, you know, people would later see. And it's a scary thing to sort of put yourself out on the line like that. And I've never had a director who encouraged, much less demanded it, as much as Luca.
And Timothée, can you talk about that as well? If, the sort of butterflies in the stomach that Luca was talking about is something that I think very much comes from your character. And was that something that was difficult for you? Was it hard for you to be sort of like that kind of vulnerable on screen?
Yeah, I guess it just seemed like the prescription of the novel and the prescription of the script that this character wears his heart on his sleeve and is living his experience sensually and viscerally, and there also seemed to be the gift as an actor that a lot of these shots play out in wide shots, and it's not so much a dialogue that's verbal, but like a physical wrestling match sometimes, and a push and pull, and I always like the moments in the movie where maybe Oliver is assumed the control of a situation, and then just by taking a step up to him, the boundaries of the situation have been, or the rules of the situation rather, have been disturbed. So, and then there's the other thing that, and it sounds like cheesy or cliche or something, but when you trust your director, and simply from watching Melissa P. or I Am Love or A Bigger Splash, I just knew all the performances. And I think of like Ray Fiennes' dancing sequence in A Bigger Splash, where he comes out and he's naked, and they were all so fearless and unabashed. It just felt like it was a responsibility to follow in that pedigree.
And Luca, can you talk a little bit about that as well? Like with what Armie's saying about getting your actors to this sort of very vulnerable place. What do you feel like you do to sort of bring those things out of them?
I don't know, secret of the work, I don't know.
Well, that's what we're here to find out.
I don't know, I think I show my vulnerability to you guys. It's a lesson from Truman Capote. He made this very great interview, The Duke in His Domain, to Marlon Brando, and he basically spoke about himself for 3 hours until Marlon started to speak about himself. And then he published the thing, and Marlon was furious about it. I don't know.
It's very much a leading by example kind of thing, yeah.
And now,
But the truth is that I love them very much. And I really want to be with them, and I think I am enjoying what they do. Again, I am very in admiration of performers of this caliber, and in general of performers, because it's not an easy job.
and Timothy, you mentioned dancing in Bigger Splash, and there is a somewhat notable dance scene in this movie as well. Armie. Did you expect it to be as kind of notable of a scene as it turned out to be?
No. First of all, let me explain. If you're doing a dance scene in a movie, there's no music. You are dancing to complete silence, except maybe like a click track so you can keep rhythm. So I'm 6'5". I'm on a dance floor. I immediately assume that I'm the lanky guy that everyone's like, who's the really tall guy flailing over there? And then all of a sudden there's no music, and you're sober because you're working. I don't know about a lot of people, but I've never really been sober and thought, oh, now's the perfect time to dance. So all of these things combined with the fact that there's now a crew staring at you, watching you, and the focus puller is going, dude, it's 4 a.m. We've been here for 7 hours. Can we just get this over with? And you're like, trust me, I want this to end as badly as you do. But that's me, and that's very different to how Oliver felt in the moment. And that entire scene is just about letting go of your inhibitions and completely losing yourself in a moment and just being enraptured in the music and in the perfect place and the perfect weather and the perfect time and the perfect year and the perfect summer with the perfect person and like all this stuff. And that's what the scene was about. So much of it was just about letting go. And that's one of the most challenging scenes I've ever done as an actor.
And now the fact that I think you did the dance to no music and just sort of to rhythm, it has now become a thing on the internet where people like to put other music to it, and it's become increasingly popular. And how do you feel about that? And maybe Luca, how do you feel about having created such a moment?
I'm proud of it. I'm very happy. He hates that. I'm very happy. It's fantastic.
Next question.
Well, now the movie really builds to this final moment, the scene between Timothy and Michael that I think people just always leave the theater talking about. And Michael, what was that moment like for you to know maybe throughout the shooting that you're sort of building to this big scene that you're going to have? Is that something that just kind of like looms large in your mind the whole time that you're shooting?
I learned early on to try not to give any particular scene any greater importance than any other scene. And it was a valuable lesson when I learned it. So whatever trepidation I had, I also had, because we shot in chronological order, 4+ weeks, 5 weeks, to live with it and stretch every idea, thought, undercurrent, alone with myself in my room, over and over and over and over and over again, until it just became a part of the story. And I think that was it was a good thing. It was a good thing for me to not think of it that way, because it was just where we were in the process when it came time to shoot it. And I think we were both very ready.
And Timothy, I've heard you speak quite movingly about what it was like for you to also be in that scene with Michael. What was that day like for you?
Well, when I was 11 or 12 years old, I had seen Michael in a play called The Pillow Man by Martin McDonagh in New York, and I was totally floored by it. And he had been somebody for like years that was a mainstay of New York theater that when I would go see shows. So the idea on that day was just to be like a fly on the wall, or really try to be as little disturbance in the work of a master. And to a more like emotional degree, I get it every time I watch the scene in the movie, but I got to tell you, being on the opposite side of it and hearing those things, particularly when I think like a lot of probably the people in the audience tonight are creatively minded, artistically minded, and you kind of salivate masochistically about things in your life, and you beat yourself up, and that whole monologue is about like being gentle with yourself and just taking it easy, and that to grieve or to be in pain when you feel shitty, you're doing the exactly right thing, and there's no wrong way to go through that experience, short of beating yourself up to a pulp or to a degree that doesn't make sense. So it was a tremendous gift, and the scene's so powerful in the novel. The only anxiety is that you want to do it right. You want to get it across.
And Luca, what was that scene like for you to shoot? What do you do when you have what you know is going to be kind of a big moment in the film like that? And was it difficult to not have it seem too much like you're kind of hitting it on the nose, that in some ways a lot of the main themes of the movie come through in that moment? And so what was it like for you in shooting that scene?
Well, the thing you need to do in that moment is to disappear. As a filmmaker, you have to let the scene breathe, keep it simple, listen to the situation, to the rhythm of the performances and the plays. That's what we try to do.
And then that also brings me to talking to Timothy about the peach scene in the movie, which I think would be such a challenge because it's something that's in the novel and probably makes sense in the book, but to actually sort of make that real is a whole other set of challenges, not the least of which did not make it seem silly. And so was that something that was difficult to do?
Well, I'd been desiring a project to have sex with a fruit for a number of years, and this just seemed like the perfect opportunity to do that. But no, in all seriousness, like you said, it works so well in the book, and it's all things uncomfortable in as much as it really serves a powerful point that love takes on shapeless forms and expresses itself as it pleases. But there was a certain relief, like talking to Luca and Andre Osman, who wrote the book before we started doing the movie, that maybe it wouldn't work as well on film. And I think, like similar to the last shot in the movie, I just thought to myself, if this is no good, it just won't make it in. So.
Luca, do you have anything you want to add about that scene? Do you want to? Is there anything that you want to say about that? What was that scene like for you?
I agree with you. It was really difficult to understand how to make it before we made it, because it is something so intimate for a reader, and it could have been involuntarily ridiculous. But I think they made a great job.
I know ever since the film first premiered earlier this year at Sundance, there's just been such a tremendous emotional response from audiences. And I'm wondering if for all of you that's been something that's been surprising. Armie, have you been surprised the way that the movie, it seems like every time that it shows, it just gets such a strong emotional response?
I mean, I certainly wasn't expecting it. This was just a small movie, a passion project for everybody that we all sort of committed to because we believed in it, and we all put a lot into this. Sweat equity, time. I mean, at one point when we were shooting the waterfall scene, everybody was carrying gear up the mountain. I mean, it was just something that we all believed in and took on because we believed in the story, and more importantly, we believed in Luca. So to go and have this experience and to go to the Italian countryside and live, you know, the same vibe that the movie kind of embodies. You guys were in it for an hour and 40 something minutes. We got to live in that for 2 months. So whatever the audience reaction is, it's just icing on the cake of the experience that's already delicious.
Michael, have you been surprised by the response to the movie?
Delighted, absolutely delighted. You never know what you're making, really, until you see it. And it's been so gratifying and humbling and beautiful, you know. And that's all. Luca.
How do you feel about the response to the movie so far?
I feel great. I feel humbled.
But is it roughly what you expected, especially since the movie deals with such intangible things? It's about desire, it's about young love, like it's things that are kind of hard to put your finger on.
No, you can't. I mean, I think we tried to make our best, but then the movie goes out in the world and it has to walk on its own feet. So it has been a really intense and riveting and humbling process to show this film out in the world. And we feel grateful.
And that's where we're going to wrap it up tonight. Please everyone join me in thanking our guests tonight for the movie Call Me By Your Name.